The planet of Zoria Prime had never been kind to newcomers. Its jagged cliffs and sulphurous skies were hostile enough to keep most explorers at bay. But Dr. Elias Ward, a human anthropologist and field doctor, had never been the type to take hostile seriously. He was drawn to Zoria Prime not by the threat but by the challenge, the chance to study the indigenous species, the Zorani, whose skeletal structures were unlike any known life form in the galaxy. Zorians were humanoid but far taller than humans, with skin that shimmered in shades of teal and violet, and elongated limbs that moved with an eerie grace. Their bones were extraordinarily fragile, almost crystalline, which made traditional medical intervention, if it could even be called that, extremely risky. And yet, something about their culture had fascinated him. Their strict code of honor, their intricate rituals, and their surprisingly gentle society, despite the planet's savage environment. Elias had been on Zoria Prime for 6 months, embedded within the Zorani village of Vareth. He was mostly accepted, The elders tolerated him, the youth were wary, and some of the more traditionalist warriors openly despised him. They called him the human intruder, though in private, the children would giggle and sneak him rare fruits and crystalline water. He had grown used to their mistrust, until the day everything changed. It began as an ordinary expedition beyond the village cliffs. Elias had been accompanying a young Zorani scout named Lyra, a brilliant and stubborn warrior with a streak of defiance that reminded him of a younger version of himself. She had insisted on accompanying him to gather rare flora for his research, but what began as a routine survey quickly turned disastrous. A sudden rockslide, triggered by the unstable Zorian terrain, sent Lyra tumbling down a jagged incline. Elias could hear her scream as the world tilted beneath her, and then a sickening crack echoed through the canyon. He raced to her side, dodging falling debris, and found her lying in a crater of dust and stone, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Her femur had shattered, the shards dangerously near puncturing her other tissues. "Lyra," he shouted, heart pounding. "Stay with me." Her eyes, wide and glinting in the dim light, met his. She tried to laugh through the pain. "I'm fine, just a scratch." Elias knew better. The Zorani skeletal structure could not withstand conventional treatment. A bone break that might be a minor inconvenience for a human could be fatal for a Zorani. The only option, one he had only read about in classified anthropological reports, was manual realignment. He would have to set the bone barehanded. "No, Elias, you can't," she whispered, panic rising in her eyes. "You don't understand, you'll hurt me." "I understand perfectly," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "If I don't do this now, you could lose your leg, or worse." She struggled to pull away, hissing a sound that was part fear, part fury. The elders had always warned her people against trusting humans' hands. "You monster," she screamed, thrashing violently. You'll kill me." Elias froze for a fraction of a second, understanding the depth of her terror. But the seconds were precious. He secured her with a thick rope from his survival kit and whispered, "I need you to trust me, Lyra. I can't do this if you fight me." For a tense moment, her violet eyes narrowed, tears mingling with dust on her cheeks. But something in his calm persistence, maybe desperation, finally convinced her. She let him approach. The process was agonizing for both of them. Elias gritted his teeth and used every ounce of his human strength to manipulate her fragile bone, feeling it give and click under his fingers. Lyra's screams echoed through the canyon, not from injury alone, but from the raw terror of letting a human touch her in such an intimate, invasive way. "You monster! You monster!" she screamed again, even as he worked to realign the bone. But there was a strange undertone to her voice now, something akin to disbelief, a recognition that he was actually saving her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bone snapped into place. Elias wrapped it with improvised bindings from his pack, careful not to crush the delicate tissue. Lyra collapsed back against the rock, trembling, silent now except for shallow, ragged breaths. He looked at her and said softly, "It's done. You'll walk again." She stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to speak. The anger and fear had ebbed, replaced by a fragile trust. The journey back to Vareth was tense. Lyra leaned heavily on him, her body still rigid with shock. Villagers stared at the sight of a human carrying one of their own, a sight that would have been unthinkable days ago. Whispers followed them. Many questioned his sanity. Some muttered that the gods would punish him for touching Zorani bones. But Lyra did not cry out again, not even when the path grew treacherous. Once inside the village, the elders gathered around, scrutinizing her. There was silence, thick and heavy, until the matriarch of the village, an elderly Zorani named Aravel, spoke. "She survived because of you," Aravel said slowly, her voice both reverent and cautious. "But mark this, human. Your hands are dangerous. The power to save can easily become the power to destroy." Elias bowed slightly. "I understand. I did what I had to do." The matriarch's eyes softened. "Then you have our gratitude for now. But remember, trust is earned, not given." The days that followed were strange. Lyra recovered rapidly, astonishing everyone. The Zorani medicine men had expected complications, but none arose. Her bone had healed unusually well, almost miraculously, and the villagers began to treat Elias differently. No longer merely tolerated, he became respected, though cautiously. Children would sneak glances at him, and some even mimicked his gestures. He felt a sense of belonging he had never anticipated. Yet Lyra remained distant, watching him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the cliffs, she approached him quietly. "You didn't hurt me," she said finally, sitting cross-legged in the dust. Her leg was bandaged, still tender, but she moved with far more confidence than expected. "But why did you do it?" "I screamed at you. Called you a monster. Most humans wouldn't even bother." Elias smiled faintly, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch you suffer. I've seen enough death, Lyra, to know that hesitation can be more dangerous than courage." Her eyes lingered on him, analyzing, measuring. "You are strange, but perhaps not a monster." For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps not." Weeks passed, and Elias continued his work. He mapped the terrain, collected plant samples, and studied Zorani behavior, all while Lyra watched him closely. She would sometimes join him on his expeditions, offering guidance and protection. Other times, she would train with the young warriors, her movements graceful, precise, and deadly. But always, there was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged in crisis, trust built through the most intense vulnerability. One day, disaster struck again. A massive storm swept across the cliffs of Vareth, stronger than any recorded in the village's history. Trees were uprooted, rocks fell from the cliffs, and the river swelled to dangerous levels. Many villagers were trapped in their homes, and a group of children were stranded near a cliff's edge. Elias and Lyra raced to the scene. The water was swift, nearly waist-deep, and the rocks were slick with rain. One child slipped, and before Lyra could reach him, Elias dove into the torrent. Strong hands grabbed the child just as the current tried to pull him away. Then, without hesitation, he extended a hand to Lyra, helping her navigate the treacherous path. For the first time, she did not resist him. She trusted him completely, and together, They rescued all the children. When the storm passed, the village elders gathered. There was no need for words. Their actions had proven what could not be taught. Elias was not just a human intruder. He was a protector. A bridge between two worlds that had never fully understood each other. Months later, as spring returned to the jagged cliffs and violet mist settled in the valleys, Lyra approached Elias again. This time, there was no fear in her voice. "You saved me once," she said, her tone calm, measured. "And then you saved our children. I believe in you now. Not as a human, not as an intruder, but as someone who is worthy." Elias felt a warmth he had never known on this planet. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her arm, not to restrain, not to heal, but simply to connect. Lyra allowed it, and for a long moment, they stood together, watching the sun rise over Zoria Prime, its light glinting off her healed bones, strong and unbroken. "YouMonster," she whispered softly, echoing the words she had screamed in fear months ago, but now, there was no accusation in her tone. Only acknowledgement. A recognition that sometimes monsters could be heroes and heroes could be human. And in that moment, Elias realized that he had not just saved a life. He had forged a bond that would endure across species, across worlds. A bond that began with terror, grew through trust, and was cemented in courage. The cliffs of Vareth were no longer hostile to him. They had become home. And perhaps, in some strange, unspoken way, so had she. Months later, the village had fully recovered from the storm. The Zorani elders held a council unlike any before. Traditionally, humans were not allowed in these sacred gatherings, but Elias was invited. It was a moment that marked not just acceptance, but honor. The elders, stoic and commanding, acknowledged his courage and skill, both in healing Lyra and in rescuing the children. "You have done what no human should dare," Aravel, the matriarch, said. Her voice, aged and unwavering, carried the weight of centuries. "And yet, you acted not out of pride or conquest, but of compassion. That is what makes you worthy." The villagers, gathered outside the council hall, bowed their heads in respect. For the first time, Elias saw not just acceptance, but admiration in their eyes. The children he had saved ran to him, laughing and clinging to his hands, a reminder that trust, once earned, could endure. Lyra approached him last. Her violet eyes, once filled with fury and terror, now held something deeper: gratitude, respect, and an unspoken bond forged in the fires of danger. She spoke softly, almost a whisper meant only for him. "You called me stubborn, reckless," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Perhaps you were right. But now you've shown me that even humans, creatures I once feared, can be heroes. You set more than a bone that day, Elias. You set the path for understanding between our people." Elias felt the weight of her words. He had come to Zoria Prime seeking knowledge, expecting only to study the Zorani. Instead, he had found friendship, trust, and a connection that transcended the boundaries of species. The sun was setting, casting long violet shadows across the cliffs. Elias and Lyra stood together at the edge of the village, overlooking the valley below. "You were right," he said quietly. "Trust is earned, and I'm grateful you gave it." Lyra's eyes softened. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on his arm, not as a patient, not as a ward, but as an equal. "You're no monster, Elias. But remember this, the line between protector and destroyer is thin. Guard it well." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I will." That night, under the twin moons of Zoria Prime, the villagers gathered to celebrate life and survival. Fires blazed, music filled the air with haunting harmonies, and for the first time, humans were part of the festival. Elias watched Lyra dance with the other warriors, her movements graceful and free. A small smile played on her lips as she caught his gaze. In that instant, all fear, pain, and anger from that first accident had transformed into something far more profound: respect, understanding, and friendship. Days turned into weeks, and Elias continued his work among the Zorani, but the dynamic had shifted. Where once he had been merely tolerated, now he was consulted. Villagers sought his advice on matters of medicine and strategy. Lyra, too, became a bridge between their cultures, teaching him the ways of Zorani combat and survival. One evening, after a long day of surveying the cliffs, Lyra and Elias returned to the high plateau where it had all begun. The jagged cliffs, the sharp winds, the ever-present danger, it had shaped them both. Elias looked down at the valley, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. "I never imagined I'd feel at home here," he admitted, voice soft. "You're home," Lyra said simply. "Not because of where you come from, but because of what you've done. You fought fear, pain, and even my anger, yet you stayed. That is what makes a home." Elias smiled. He extended his hand, and this time, she took it willingly. Not because she had to, not because she feared, but because she chose to. Their bond, once forged in terror and survival, had evolved into mutual respect, trust, and perhaps something deeper. As the twin moons rose again, casting silver light over the cliffs, Elias realized something remarkable. He had come to Zoria Prime as an outsider, a stranger in a world not meant for him. But through courage, compassion, and sheer determination, he had become part of something greater. He had crossed the boundary between species, healed both flesh and fear, and built a connection that might one day unite two worlds. Lyra squeezed his hand gently, her eyes glinting with moonlight. "You were called a monster once," she whispered, "but perhaps the real monsters are those who cannot help others. You are something far more rare." Elias chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'll take rare over monster any day." The wind carried their laughter across the cliffs, echoing through the valleys below. And for the first time, Zoria Prime felt less like a hostile alien world and more like home, a place of danger, yes, but also of trust, courage, and connection. In the distance, the first stars began to shimmer, distant suns lighting the path forward. Elias and Lyra stood together, human and Zorani, side by side. No words were necessary. The bond they had forged in terror, cemented in trust, and nurtured through mutual respect, was stronger than any language, stronger than any fear. "YouMonster," Lyra said again, a teasing tone this time, "but perhaps the best monster I've ever known." Elias laughed, feeling warmth fill him in a way he never had before. He looked up at the stars and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever worlds he might visit, he had found a connection that transcended fear and pain. He had learned that sometimes courage was measured not by what you could destroy, but by what you could save, and that even the most fragile among us could teach the strongest humans what it meant to truly trust. And with that, the human and the Zorani warrior turned away from the cliffs, stepping forward together into a future neither could have imagined, bound forever by the moment when fear had turned into trust, and a scream had become the beginning of understanding.